about reefing a lot is people say, show me the proof, show me the scientific proof. And that's a problematic word, because if you want to be technical, if you want to be right about it, proving things only happens in math, right? You only get actual proofs in math. Prove it to me is a colloquialism. What you really mean is, show me the evidence that makes you think that, so I can decide if I think that that evidence is compelling enough to make me change my mind, right? Because think about it. When people say, prove it to me, and then somebody trots out a paper, a peer-reviewed paper, who the fuck understands that paper? That paper's not for us. Those papers are for people who are expert in that field. So those papers are, you know, the first thing that happens with a paper, if you give me a paper, which happens all the time, somebody goes, hey, is this okay for spawning? Or is this okay for, you know, whatever? It's like, oh God, now I've got to read the paper. I've got to look at the abstract. I've got to say, is this paper even talking about what we think it's talking about? What are the significant figures? And, you know, if it said it saw a reduction in calcification, now I've got to do a whole lot of math to convert that amount of reduction in calcification to a percentage, because papers never do that. So we can go, yeah, it was a 4% reduction in calcification. Who cares? But that's a whole lot of work. So the paper is not proof. The paper is evidence. It might be good evidence. It might be not compelling evidence. So I like, and also people get it in their heads that this is like a super beef. This is like a giant beef burrito. They get it in their heads that that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, that we understand all of this, and we don't. So don't ask for proof, ask for evidence, because evidence can be anything. Evidence can be Ben Johnson's, my evidence for doing the plumbing in a more methodical way. That's what the word I was looking for before. Why should I do my plumbing in a more methodical way? Because Ben Johnson, who has done 1 million plumbing jobs and has been in the industry since before there were crosses to crucify people on, says so. And that's not necessarily a bad reason to do anything. You know, what light should I use? Well, Sanjay likes this one and Jim likes this one. Either one of those is going to be fine. And, you know, I've got a chemistry question. Why do you believe it? Because Craig told it to me. You know, listen, I had a conversation with Maupin about evaporation the other day, because my tank salinity, my system salinity was going up, and I couldn't figure out why.
Crappy conductivity probe.
Right? No, it was not. It was actually going up. Not only did I bust out the floating hydrometer, but I also got another one that's supposed to be more accurate. They're the same. It's fine. To check the salinity, because it would go up over 3 or 4 days. And I was like, what the fuck's going on? So I got into this whole mind story about evaporation, and I was confusing the hell out of myself. Is it evaporate less or more when it's hotter or colder, right? There's that rule of thumb that you get more evaporation when it's hotter. Not really true, as with most mind stories. But so Chris and I talk about this for 40 minutes because I'm losing my mind. My salinity keeps going up, and it's bad if I don't catch it and stay on top of it. So it turns out that I've got a lot of surface area under the house of water, right? And it's cold outside. Under the house is essentially outside. Anyway, the difference really is that if your water is hot in a cold place and you keep adding more heat into the water, you're going to get a lot of evaporation. There's a zone just on top of the water where the water has evaporated, so it's 100% saturation, but it's not water. And that is, if the air temperature is cold, you're stealing energy from that system constantly. So here's the analogy. You got a coffee cup or a teacup that's got hot piping fluid in it, right? Coffee. You go outside on a snowy day, that's going to steam, right?
Mhm.
So it's evaporating the crap out of that coffee. That's what the steam is. If you put a heater in that coffee cup and kept it at 100 degrees, it would evaporate very quickly.
Okay.
So the upshot of it is that I had a tube from a peristaltic pump that was supposed to be pulling water out of my system, not in the water. So it was just pumping air.
Oh,
So I'm putting 30 liters of new salt water into my tank every day, into my system. It's about 8 gallons. Without taking any water out of the system, it was
okay.
evaporating about 30 liters of fresh water out of my tank every couple of days. So the salinity kept going up. It turned out all it was I wasn't actually pulling water out. So the auto top off of fresh water never was triggered.
I mean, but question. So the technical question, how did that happen?
I knocked the line out when I was
Okay,
doing
okay.
something. I've got a better, that's all going to get fixed in the revamp that's coming up. I've known that this is a danger. And I've got an idea of how to do it all. So, you know, if Maupin says this is how evaporation works, that's good enough evidence for me. He's proven himself time and time again. He's a fucking paleoclimatologist.
PhD.
Evaporation
Yeah.
is what feeds hurricanes, and that's what he studies.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of what he studies.
I mean, to be contrary to that, it'd be like arguing with Craig Bingman about Kalkwasser.
It's the same exact thing. I am not going to get into the minutia of the chemistry of Kalkwasser with Craig. I'm just going to go, cool. Craig said, so that's good evidence. That's, anecdotal evidence is fine. Wow, man. This person I know, Matt Wandell's got a beautiful tank and I love his tank. And he says he's doing this. Okay, let's try that. Right. I don't necessarily need any kind of knockdown, drag out evidence that's going to settle this question forever, because none of it is, right? So like the word better, I would like us to get rid of the word proof, because I think it sets a standard that is unattainable and just makes people fight with each other. A paper is not the knock all drag out of everything. Papers are wrong all the time.
But is it almost too like people, I mean, that sounds like elitism, but I do respect someone who has attained a PhD. Let me put it that way. It doesn't mean that they're the patron saint of whatever. I get it. But I mean, how are you equipped? That's a big question, because some people get all touchy, like elitism, but how are you equipped to argue over someone who has a PhD in a subject? I mean, they could be an asshole, but how are you equipped to argue with them?
And they have shown over and over again that they know what they're talking about. You can argue with Randy Holmes Farley all you want about husbandry practices.
Okay.
But when he tells you how alkalinity is affected from calcium hydroxide,
what do you,
I'm going to go with Randy. Unless you have really compelling evidence to present that Randy's wrong. Not a big deal, right? I mean, it makes sense. You're not going to talk to your sportsing, a coach that's winning all the time. You're going to listen to that coach when they give you advice. A coach that's not winning all the time, this is not, and they say, what you really should do is this. And you kind of go, that doesn't seem really compelling, because you do that all the time and it never works.
Yeah, like who's the Patriots dude? Like Bill Belichick? Like, I just barely know that. I'm just throwing it out there. But like, yeah, so that's to do with the Patriots, and they've won the sportsing event many times. And then he's like, this is how we win, and I'm like, no, it's not. Like, how stupid does that sound?
Right. So that's why we say, ask for a picture of a person's tank that you're taking advice from. So you get an idea of if that's what you want. But, the important thing, I think, is that, well, the real question is, how do you make decisions? right? With all this evidence out there, everyone who says you can get rid of cyano by lowering your nutrients, they have some kind of evidence to support that idea. I don't find it compelling.
Richard, you changed me again.
Yeah? How so?
Man, for 20 years, I've been using red slime remover, and I sort of have it down to a science because I've used it more than the next individual. You know, how to put it in and then how to remove it and how to proceed further after that. For me, I've done it so many times, it's like a no-brainer. But I had a client that had a cyano problem, and in our Discord, you were recommending to some people to do that, and I watched in real time as these people dealt with it, the 3-day blackout. So I told my client to just do a 3-day blackout. Boom. Gone.
If it comes back in a month, do it again.
No chemicals, no extra polyfilter, extra carbon, extra giant water change, me being at the client 2 times longer than I normally am. 3-day blackout.
No putting antibiotics in that are doing something to the system.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. That makes me feel good. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't question people. I'm just saying that you should be aware of how compelling your evidence is. You know, you're going to talk to me about chloroquine, I'm going to have to defer to some other people. And you know, the minutia about, are we arguing, you know, are you having a high level discussion or a low level discussion? You know, prove to me that this pump is, I should use this pump over this pump. There is no proof of that. There is just evidence of people's testimonials, their anecdote about how those pumps work for them. Something might stand out. You go, oh, you know, oh, I need Wi-Fi. That pump doesn't have Wi-Fi, so I'm not going to use it. But it's not better or worse or proven. It's just how compelling is the evidence. Do I need, is that, am I wrong? Does that make sense? Because I see people getting head to head about proof, and then they trot out papers, and and most of the time they're just reading the fucking abstracts of the paper, not reading the whole paper anyway. And it just makes me crazy. And then they demand scientific evidence. And it's like, that's not what we're all about.
No, and I know, and it's like I said a couple episodes ago, like I love the aquarium industry, and it's chock full of science, but it is not a scientific endeavor. And I mean, the whole impetus for you and me having the show is sort of like debunking and defrauding, and, you know, sort of cutting to the chase and the plain shit. We're not bottling a product to sell you. And even if we do, it'd be real tongue in cheek. It's just, you know, you don't, my position, like there's so many bottles of magical bullshit. You don't need 99% of them. It's just, you know, consistent maintenance and doing what you do. And, you know, I'm a product, you know, I'd spent 10 years in 5 different stores from Dallas to Houston. And, you know, I got sick of it. And I left to work at the zoo for sort of like an interim, like mind change. And then after that, I started this maintenance company. I just got sick of, like, okay, I'm not going to name a company, but the whatever rep would come in and say, hey, you're not selling bottle X. But here's the trick, and I don't mean to sound arrogant on this, but usually the places that I worked with, I became the #1 salesman, just because I was always charismatic with the clients, and they'd ask me a question, I'd give them more than they asked, and this and that. I became popular every place that I worked. I became popular with the clientele coming in. I was not popular with the sales reps for the manufacturing companies. Hey, why aren't you selling the bottle of blah, blah, blah? Because it's bullshit. Just, I tell the client, buy more salt, do more regular water changes, or what, you know, be consistent, blah, blah, blah. In a store mindset, and hey, local fish stores, I'm sorry, man, because I know that there's good ones out there. I'm not trying to crap on everybody, but it's like, you know, when I'm behind the counter and you come in, hey, I got a problem. You know what? I got that solution, and it's on that counter over there. Whatever problem you tell me you have, you got ick, you got algae, you got cloudy water. Do you have blah, this or that? I got a bottle to fix any problem you have, a magic elixir on my counter, you know? So it's like, it's just sort of frustrating. That's what Richard and I are doing with this show, is you don't need a magic bottle of whatever. We're trying to teach y'all, like, it's a little more simple than everyone makes it out to be.
Right. And the reason you and I are dicks, I'm sorry, the reason you and I are jackasses about some of this stuff is because we have a shit ton of experience. Both of us love to be wrong. I'm thrilled when I'm wrong.
I learn when I'm wrong.
But you know, if you're gonna challenge me on skimming, or you're gonna challenge me on salinity, or you're gonna challenge me on some basic stuff, you better have some compelling evidence for me. It's back to Sagan's, baloney detection kit. And the more experienced somebody is in a given realm, the more compelling you just need to get your evidence in line. It's like, we're fucking so tired about the nanobubble thing, but the bubble thing, it's like there was no compelling evidence for it, for most of the claims they were making.
A lot of people listening or watching this aren't going to know what we're even talking about.
There was the thing to have nanobubbles. I
hate to dig it up.
I don't even want to dig it up. We talked about it before. We got a link to it somewhere before. It's not worth it. It was an idea that had some basic utility from the get-go, meaning it acts as a flocculant. Maybe it impacts your pH.
But then extra claims were thrown on it.
But
that
then
cannot be
a ton of stuff. And it didn't make sense. And the papers they were using to justify it didn't say what they said the papers said. So there was a whole lot about that. And that's fine. I don't want to fight about that. I want to have a discussion about that. And the only reason I get involved in those kind of discussions is to see if I'm wrong so I can be better. So I
go back to what I was talking about last episode too, about ego. Like I mean, this isn't a philosophical show. I just think it's good for people to understand their ego and how they wrap them up into ideas they have. So when those ideas get challenged, you feel like your ego is being attacked, and you shouldn't do that with ideas. So because you're going to tilt at every single windmill.
Yeah. And I want just to give examples of trying to make the evidence more compelling, because I think maybe that's what I'm getting at with all this is, if I'm going to challenge something, I'm going to spend a lot of time making sure my challenge makes some kind of sense before I bring it to the world. And especially before I give people advice, really hardcore advice. The phosphate talk I did the first time, I spent 2 years paying attention to phosphates in my tank and what's going on, and doing a shit ton of testing before I presented that and wrote it up. The new talk about algae and managing algae with nutrients and why that doesn't make sense. I spent 3 or 4 years exploring that idea before I finally felt like I had a case.
I mean, what would be embarrassing is to stand up in front of a bunch of people or an online audience and say, blah, 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 blah. And then someone brings forth a compelling argument and just eviscerates you. That's embarrassing.
Shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, but it usually is.
Well, that's because if ego's involved.
But you need time to work that out in your head, because initially everyone's reaction is just, oh, you challenging me, blah, 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 is defense.
Right. And that's why I suppose when I say, what's your support for that, people get pissed off.
But that's where I laugh when I'm listening to the conversation, because I'm like, I don't mean to genderize that, but like, bro, you came to this conversation with potholes in your argument. Like, you should not have come on to a online audience with that many holes in your assertions, which, okay, it's not like I'm some big brain, but it just makes me think that some people come up with some idea and they never brought it up to someone who really challenged them. And then they start drumming it up, and then someone actually challenges them and they get all pissed. And it's just like, man, you should have done this in private, because it's enough getting embarrassed in private. It's far worse getting embarrassed on social media.
Yeah, you know what? But I think people should just get over that. If you've got a better idea than mine, even if I'm out championing it from the rooftops, give me the compelling evidence, because if I'm wrong, I want to know about it so I can stop being wrong. This whole endeavor of all of these tanks and this show and anything I've ever done in reef keeping is to make me better. It's not to, clearly I'm not writing books and trying to make other people set up tanks. That's not a line of income I've cared about, because I'm totally selfish. The reason personally I'm still on the forums talking and not talking as much, but paying attention and sometimes talking, is because I want to be better. I want to be up to snuff. I want to challenge my ideas all the time.
Yeah.
Because I'm not always right. And I know that. There are very few areas where I feel expert, and I'm happy to be expert on that. And even those areas, I'm happy to be wrong, right? It's like Dawkins says, if you go to a scientific conference, everyone who gets up kind of goes, all right, I'm going to talk about this. And I'm sure, there's 10 people in the room that know more about it than me. So hopefully I've got it right. And off we go, right? And afterwards, people, like you twice tonight, you said, I've changed your mind. I've altered your thinking. That's incredibly amazing that you have listened to what I've said and agreed with it, and it's altered the way you look at something. That's awesome. And that happens to me all the fucking time. It happens to me on the Discord. I don't know shit about battery backups. So Jim knows shit about battery backups. I watched a bunch of the stuff he did, about battery backups. And then I reached out to him and I went, tell me what to do. Now, it may be that through doing it, I'm going to learn a different way to do it that makes more sense to me. But to get started, I want the fucking CADE system of battery backups. I just want it to work.
I started smiling because I sort of had this idea about how people's brains work and thinking about forums. Because the funny thing is I don't know if this is like a show, like to make a show about this, but like, how would one identify a supposed expert on a subject? Because what forums seem like to me is you don't know anything about aquariums. You go on there like my axolotl's dying. What do I do? And Jim Bob 402 says, oh, well, you got to put baking soda in the water. Like, is that what you do on forums, is just start taking anyone's fucking opinion on anything? And then you get mad because you're confused. You have not identified an expert. So why the fuck are you so mad about random motherfuckers making assumptions? And you're like, why you guys have 20 different opinions? It's a bunch of numbskulls. Find the expert. Find the subject matter expert.
I wrote an article about experts. So that's out there if people want to read it. And we can do a show about experts because it is an interesting thing. Because you have to trust them, but you also have to squint at them.
I think you always squint.
But that's
always.
What comes back to the compelling evidence. If you're talking to somebody who is expert or considered expert, you really want to have your ducks in a row a little bit before you challenge them.
And if you don't know the first thing about someone, you should squint about everything. If you're on a forum and you said, why can't I keep axolotls alive? And 15 different people answer, I mean, that's just part of the problem. You don't know who these people are or why they would know anything about an axle. Otherwise, they're just spitting word salad, and then you get mad at them. I'm not saying maybe you should be mad at yourself for taking random fucking opinions.
Yes, you should. Yes, and if you on the Reef forums, sure, same with the axolotl forums. Those 20 people all tell you something different. It can be crazy making. It's
like
hard.
I just run into the mall, like, how do I tie my shoe? And everyone, tells me how to tie my shoe. And then I get mad at them because some of them told me how to tie it wrong. Like,
right. So it's the same thing with kites, right? Different kites do different things. And people are always on the beach going, what kite should I get? What's the best kite? And it's like, but it's the same thing. It's like, what do you want to do with it?
What are you trying to do?
If you
What's
wanna-
your fitness level? What's blah, blah,
If you want
blah.
to kite here, I can tell you what works for me. Are you talking to me because I'm out when there's barely any wind and other people aren't able to do that? Okay, I'll tell you what I do. I don't know if that's going to work for you, but I can tell you what I do. But everyone wants to go, what kite should I buy? I don't fucking know what kite, what are you going to do? Everything is more complicated than a simple answer.
Yeah. Yeah. So many
okay.
things.
So how do you make those decisions? Find somebody you trust, look at their tank, see if it's a tank you want, and then kind of listen to what they have to say. And then run those ideas by some other people and see if people think that makes some kind of sense.
Everyone wants an easy answer, and in the low hanging fruit, easy answer is quite often to an expert going to be the wrong answer.
Right. And so my reticence to give recipes, which I think are easy answers, is because I think recipes, first of all, no one follows them. And second of all, I think it leads to a weakness in reef keeping, and the animals deserve more than that. So, the recipe I have is set up a fucking small 12 to 30 gallon tank and play with that with easy stuff for 6 months.
Yeah,
that's my recipe. And then everyone goes, I don't want to follow that recipe. I want an instant tank. It's like, I don't know what to tell you.